The darkened path through the forsaken woods, where no one returns. In the heart of the forgotten kingdom lay the forsaken woods, a place of whispered legends, a shadowed realm where the trees seemed to bend toward the earth, their gnarled limbs twisting like ancient, malevolent fingers. To step into the woods was to take a step into the unknown, where no traveler had ever returned whole. Those brave, or foolish, enough to venture too far spoke of eerie sounds that echoed through the trees, of eyes watching from the dark, and of figures moving just beyond the reach of light. Yet, no one ever saw what these things truly were. The legend of the forsaken woods was older than time itself. It was said that long ago, a great and terrible curse had been placed upon the land. A vengeful sorceress, angry at the betrayal of her closest allies, had called upon forbidden magics. She summoned shadows that devoured the light, and the once thriving forest became a place where death and despair took root. The cursed trees whispered secrets to those who dared listen, and the ground itself seemed to shift, trapping any who ventured too far. Even the bravest knights, cloaked in armor and bearing swords that had cleaved through dragons, returned from the woods with eyes wide and trembling. They spoke in hushed tones of an unearthly darkness that spread like ink, swallowing up all hope, all courage. Most simply vanished, their bodies never found, as if the woods itself had claimed them. A small village lay on the edge of the woods, where the last of the local storytellers still spoke of the place in hushed voices. Their tales were warnings, meant to keep the curious at bay. But curiosity has a way of gnawing at the soul, and one such soul was a young wanderer named Alaric. Alaric had heard the stories. Of course, he had heard the warnings, the pleas to stay away. But there was something in him, an unrelenting need to understand, to see beyond the veil of fear that drove him to the woods. He had grown tired of the simple life, of the mundane existence that seemed to weigh down on him like the thick fog that rolled in from the forest's edge. He wanted to know what lay beyond. He wanted to know if the stories were true. One cold, mist-laden morning, Alaric packed his things and set out toward the forsaken woods. The village elders tried to stop him, but his resolve was stronger than their warnings. The path to the woods was overgrown and treacherous, the earth soft and slippery beneath his feet. The trees loomed ahead, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch and twist unnaturally. As he crossed the threshold of the forest, the world seemed to change. The air grew heavy, thick with an ancient presence. The light from the sun dimmed as if it had been swallowed by the thick canopy above. He glanced behind him, and for the first time, he saw the true scale of the woods. The trees rose like sentinels, their trunks twisted and dark, their branches reaching out as though to trap him within their grip. He pressed forward, determined, though every instinct in his body screamed to turn back. The path before him was narrow, winding, barely visible under the thick underbrush, and yet, he walked, deeper and deeper into the heart of the forest. Hours passed, or perhaps it was days. Time had become meaningless in this place. The only sound was the rustle of leaves, the crackling of branches, and the occasional snap of a twig beneath his boots. His eyes darted around, searching for movement, for the creatures he had heard about in the old stories. But there was nothing, just the oppressive silence of the woods. That was, until he saw it. A figure, tall and cloaked in shadow, stood at the edge of the path. Its face was hidden in the folds of a tattered hood, but Alaric felt its gaze pierce him, as if it saw every fear, every doubt he had ever hidden from the world. The figure beckoned him forward, the hand that emerged from the cloak impossibly long, the fingers skeletal. "Do you seek the truth, wanderer?" The figure's voice was like the wind through the trees, hollow and cold. Alaric nodded, his heart pounding in his chest. "I do." The figure tilted its head, a smile forming beneath the hood, though it was not a smile that comforted. It was the smile of something that knew far more than it should, something ancient and hungry. "The truth comes at a price," it said. "Do you understand what you are asking for?" Alaric hesitated. He had known that the woods were dangerous, that they were not a place for the faint of heart, but he had come this far. He had to know. "I do," he said, though the words felt hollow even as they left his lips. The figure's smile grew wider, its eyes gleaming like stars in the darkness. "Then walk the path ahead, and you shall know what no mortal should." Alaric stepped forward, though his legs felt like lead. The path before him was now darker, the trees pressing in on him from all sides. It felt as though the woods themselves were alive, watching him, waiting. As he walked deeper into the forest, strange things began to happen. The shadows seemed to move of their own accord, curling around his legs, whispering words he could not understand. The trees seemed to lean closer, their branches scraping against his skin. And then, he heard it, the laughter. Soft, at first, like a breath on the wind, then growing louder, until it filled his ears and rattled his very bones. It was the laughter of the forest, of the curse that had taken root so long ago. And then, the world went black. When Alaric awoke, he found himself lying at the edge of the forest. His body ached, his mind foggy, as though he had been lost for an eternity. The sun was setting, casting a reddish glow over the woods. He pushed himself to his feet, confused and disoriented. He turned back to the forest, the path he had walked now lost to the darkened trees, and in the distance, he could hear the laughter once more. But this time, it was not the forest laughing. It was him. And Alaric realized, with a growing horror, that the woods had claimed him. He had become part of its curse, a wandering soul trapped in its endless grasp. The path that led through the forsaken woods was no longer a mere path, it was a prison. No one had ever returned from the forsaken woods, and now, Alaric knew why. The woods didn't just take lives, they took souls, and once you walked its path, you were never truly free again. The Darkened Path Through the Forsaken Woods, Where No One Returns, Part 2. Alaric's heart raced as he stumbled away from the tree line, his legs shaky beneath him. The laughter echoed in his mind like an insistent drumbeat, a constant reminder of the darkness that had claimed him. Every step he took seemed heavier than the last, as though the weight of the forest itself had settled on his shoulders. The village was just beyond the woods, he told himself, the thought of safety urging him forward. But something inside him, something deep within his chest, warned him to stop, to turn back. But where would he go? The forest's edge grew more distant, yet the trees were never far behind. A creeping sense of dread gripped him, the awareness that no matter how far he walked, he was still tethered to the forsaken woods. The landscape around him shifted subtly, as though the path was a living thing, guiding him back. The air was thick, heavy with an otherworldly pressure, and every step he took seemed to lead him further into an unknown nightmare. He thought of the figure in the woods, the one who had spoken to him, who had promised him the truth at a price. He had come for answers, but in exchange, he had found only emptiness. His mind swam with fragments of the forest's dark magic, visions flashing before his eyes, faces, twisted, broken, and yet familiar, lingered at the edges of his thoughts. The faces of those who had come before him, those who had sought the path through the woods, and never returned. A voice called out to him from behind, a soft whisper, like wind through the branches. He turned, but saw nothing but the looming shadows of the trees. Alaric, it called, faint, yet clear, you cannot escape. The voice grew louder, the whisper becoming a voice that was unmistakably his own. You are one of us now. Panic surged within him. He ran faster, pushing his legs to move even as the growing heaviness in his chest threatened to stop him. The laughter seemed to grow with every step, bouncing off the trees and reverberating through his skull. His breath came in ragged gasps. His clothes clung to his skin, drenched in sweat. Then, something changed. Before him, the path twisted sharply, its edges fading into a misty blur. The sky above darkened even more, the light that had once filtered through the trees now gone entirely. The path that had seemed so straightforward was now an endless maze. No matter which direction he turned, the shadows followed him, folding around him like a trap. He had entered a deeper part of the forest, the heart of it, the place where no one ever returned from, the place where souls were forever bound. Alaric dropped to his knees, his breath shallow, the weight of the curse pressing down on him. It was then that he saw them, figures moving within the mist, the faintest outlines of shapes, tall, thin, cloaked in shadows, their faces barely visible, but their eyes were clear, glowing, watching. They were the lost souls, the ones who had walked the path before him. They were waiting for him. Welcome, Alaric, one of them said, its voice hollow, a sound that seemed to come from all around him. We have been waiting for you. His blood ran cold as his gaze met the figure's eyes. They were the same as his own, frightened, desperate. No, Alaric gasped, his voice trembling. I didn't mean to. You never meant to, the figure said, but none of us ever do. The others circled him, their eyes glowing in the darkness. their faces twisting into expressions of sorrow and pain. "The forest takes what it needs," another one murmured, its voice like the rustle of dry leaves. "It devours the light in you, consumes the parts of you that are still human." But I didn't want this," Alaric cried, his voice breaking. His legs trembled as he tried to stand, but the ground seemed to pull at him, holding him in place. "You wanted the truth," the figure whispered, its face now inches from his own. "And the truth is this: once you enter the Forsaken Woods, you become a part of it. Your soul, your essence, they are claimed. You are not free, you are not alive, you are a shadow." Alaric's heart hammered in his chest. "Then, how do I escape?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. The figures exchanged looks, their hollow eyes gleaming with a grim understanding. "There is no escape," one said softly. "There is only the path, and it never ends. Every soul that enters the woods is destined to wander for eternity," the first figure intoned, "until the forest is ready to take them." Alaric staggered backward, his hands reaching out in desperation, grasping at the cold air as though trying to hold on to something real, something that could save him. But the forest closed in, the shadows stretched longer, their tendrils creeping around his limbs. "Then what happens to me?" he gasped. "What happens to my soul?" The figure's eyes darkened, a flicker of something ancient and terrible passing through them. "You will remain here, Alaric, just like us, trapped, forever bound to the darkened path." Alaric's breath hitched in his chest, the realization settled in like a weight of iron. He was never meant to leave. The laughter rose again, filling the void, and for the first time, Alaric understood the true nature of the curse. It was not the forest that had claimed him, it was his own choice, his own desires. The truth he had sought had never been meant for mortal minds. The knowledge of the forest was not for the living. And now, Alaric was part of the endless procession of the lost souls who had walked the darkened path, seeking something they would never find. He would never leave the woods, no one ever did. He was a shadow among shadows. He was another soul the forest had consumed, and there was no way out. The Darkened Path Through the Forsaken Woods, Where No One Returns, Part 3. Time ceased to have meaning within the Forsaken Woods. The days, weeks, or perhaps centuries, bled into one another, indistinguishable and eternal. Alaric's sense of self began to fade, his memories becoming warped and indistinct. Faces, his own, others, flitted in and out of focus like ghosts trapped in an endless loop. He could no longer tell where the forest ended and where he began. The path, once so clear, now twisted in on itself like a serpent, guiding him further into the heart of the darkened woods. The souls who had once greeted him now followed him in silence. They were nothing but echoes, their eyes hollow and empty, their forms dissolving into the mist that clung to the ground like a thick shroud. They had lost their voices long ago. Their faces were faded, just as his own was, until there was no trace of who they once were. They existed only to wander, to be consumed by the forest, never to leave. Alaric's footsteps grew slower, more mechanical. His mind teetered on the brink of insanity. The laughter, which had once felt so distant, now echoed in his thoughts, becoming a constant hum, a haunting refrain that would not be silenced. He tried to scream, to cry out, but his voice was swallowed by the forest's vast emptiness. He reached for the edges of his memories, for the village he had left behind, for his family, for his life before the woods. But the harder he grasped, the more it slipped through his fingers like sand. All he had left was the forest, and the cursed path that wound endlessly before him. He had become one of them, a lost soul, a shadow among shadows. Yet, even in his despair, a faint flicker of rebellion stirred deep inside him. There had to be a way out. There had to be something, some force, some power that could break the curse. He couldn't accept that this was his fate, that he would drift forever in the darkness, with no purpose but to wander, lost and forgotten. One day, or perhaps it was 1,000 years later, Alaric came across a new path. It was different from the others. It was narrow, lined with ancient stones that seemed to pulse with a strange energy, their surfaces etched with runes that shimmered faintly in the darkness. The air around it felt charged, as though something ancient, something powerful, lay ahead. His heart, or what remained of it, beat a little faster. Was this the way out? Was this the answer he had been seeking? The path was inviting in its silence, beckoning him to follow. Without thinking, Alaric stepped onto the path. The moment his foot made contact with the stone, a shock ran through him, a jolt that snapped him back to himself. It was brief, but powerful, like a lightning strike in the dead of night. The runes on the stones glowed brighter, their light casting eerie shadows that danced along the edges of the path. And then, as he continued forward, the world around him began to shift. The trees that had once pressed in on him began to retreat. The air grew lighter, the oppressive weight that had suffocated him loosening. He took another step. The fog that had clouded his vision lifted, revealing a sky that was no longer a void. It was faint, but it was there, a pale, dim light that seemed to promise something beyond the eternal night. The laughter that had haunted him, faint and distant before, grew louder, angrier, as though the forest itself was aware of his defiance. It reverberated through the ground beneath his feet, vibrating in his bones. But Alaric refused to stop. He had to move forward. There had to be an end to this madness. The deeper he went, the more he realized that the path wasn't just a way out, it was a test. Every step he took, the world around him seemed to fracture, the edges of reality blurred, and for the briefest of moments, Alaric saw flashes of other souls, shadows of those who had failed before him. They reached out to him, their hands clawing at the air, their voices distorted by an unseen force. He could hear their desperate cries, their pleas for help, for release. But the path moved him forward, as though it were drawing him toward something beyond his understanding, something ancient, something far older than the forest itself. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Alaric reached the end of the path. Before him stood a stone arch, its surface covered in dark ivy and moss. At first glance, it seemed like nothing more than a crumbling relic of an age long past. But Alaric knew, deep in his heart, that it was something much more. The runes on the arch pulsed with the same strange energy that had coursed through the stones beneath his feet. There was a presence here, an ancient power, waiting. The arch shimmered in the dim light, and a voice, deep, resonant, and impossibly old, spoke from the darkness beyond it. Alaric, it said, its voice like the rustle of dead leaves, you seek to escape, but all who have passed this way have failed. The Forsaken Woods claim all who enter. I won't fail, Alaric whispered, his voice filled with a resolve he hadn't felt in what seemed like forever. I refuse to become one of them. The presence chuckled softly, a sound like the wind through hollow branches. You do not understand, child. The woods do not just claim the living. They claim all who dare to seek the truth. Your desire to escape is a part of the curse. It binds you as surely as the forest itself. I know what I've become, Alaric said, his voice steady now. But I also know that I can still fight. I can still choose to walk away. The arch glowed brighter, its runes pulsing in rhythm with Alaric's heartbeat. For a moment, there was silence, deafening, suffocating silence, and then, the voice spoke again. If you truly wish to leave, then prove it. Face what you have become, face the shadows within yourself, and you may find the path forward. Alaric stepped forward, his mind clearing as he approached the arch. The air around him thickened with tension, the presence of the forest pressing in on him once more. But he refused to let fear control him. He had already walked the darkened path. He had already become part of the forest. But that didn't mean he had to remain there forever. He would face the darkness. He would face himself. The forest had claimed many before him, but Alaric would not let it claim him. Not today. With a deep breath, he stepped through the arch. And the world beyond it awaited. The darkened path through the Forsaken Woods, where no one returns, Part 4. The moment Alaric passed through the arch, everything changed. For a brief instant, it felt as though time itself ceased to exist. The air became thick and heavy, as though the very fabric of reality was shifting around him. He felt as though he was standing on the edge of something ancient, something forgotten by the world, hidden in the deepest corners of the earth. And then, the world snapped back into focus. The trees were gone. The shadows had receded. The oppressive weight that had always pressed down on him, the feeling that something unseen was watching his every move, had lifted. The air was fresh, alive with a strange, crackling energy that he had not felt since before he first entered the Forsaken Woods. He found himself standing on the edge of a vast, open field. The ground beneath him was solid and firm, the grass beneath his feet soft, swaying in a breeze that carried the scent of distant mountains. The sky overhead was not the eternal darkness he had grown accustomed to. It was blue. It was bright, with clouds drifting lazily in the air, like something out of a forgotten dream. Alaric took a hesitant step forward, his eyes scanning the horizon. He could see the distant outline of a village, his village, the place where he had once called home, before the woods had claimed him. It felt so close now, so within reach, that he almost thought he could hear the sounds of laughter and voices carried by the wind. For a moment, he stood there, breathless, unsure if he had truly escaped or if this was simply another cruel illusion created by the forest. But no, this place, this field, felt real. The sun shone down upon him, casting warmth into his skin, and the colors around him were vivid and vibrant, not the dull, muted hues of the cursed woods. But as he stepped forward, something in the distance caught his eye. At first, he thought it was just another illusion, a trick of his tired mind. But no, it was real. There, standing at the edge of the field, was the figure. The same figure that had appeared to him in the woods, the one who had spoken of the truth and the curse, the one whose face he had never truly seen, whose intentions remained hidden. It was watching him now, silent, its dark cloak flowing around its form like the night itself. The figure's presence felt like a weight pressing down on his chest, and the moment Alaric saw it, his heart began to race once more. "You should not be here, Alaric," the figure said, its voice carrying the same cold, hollow tone that had haunted him for so long. "You cannot leave." "I don't believe that anymore," Alaric replied, his voice steady despite the fear that crawled up his spine. He stepped toward the figure, his resolve hardening with each movement. "I've faced the woods, I've faced the shadows, and I refuse to be a prisoner of the curse any longer." The figure tilted its head, a slow, deliberate motion, as if considering his words. "You believe you are free, but the forest does not let go of its children so easily. The truth you seek is not what you think it is." Alaric narrowed his eyes. "I've seen the truth. I've seen what it does to people, what it did to me, and I've learned that you don't need to walk its path forever to understand it." The figure's eyes gleamed with something close to amusement, or perhaps pity. "You think you understand, but you do not. The forest does not simply trap its victims, it transforms them. Every soul it claims becomes part of something greater. You, Alaric, are no longer who you were. You are not merely a wanderer, a lost soul. You are a part of the forest now." The words struck him like a blow to the chest. Part of him wanted to deny it, to insist that he was still the same person he had been when he entered the woods. But deep down, he knew that something had changed. He had walked the path, he had seen the truth, and now, no matter how far he traveled, how hard he fought, the forest would always be a part of him. "No," he whispered, shaking his head, "I am not a part of it. I choose to be free." The figure stepped forward, its presence growing darker, more imposing. "Freedom," it repeated softly, almost mockingly. "There is no freedom in the woods. There is no escape from what has been done." Alaric's heart raced, his vision blurred for a moment, his mind once again filled with flashes of the souls he had seen, their hollow eyes staring at him from the darkness, the faces of those who had come before, lost and trapped in the same eternal cycle. And then, for the briefest of moments, he understood. He understood that the curse of the Forsaken Woods wasn't just about the trees or the path, it was about the mind. The forest fed on fear, on the desire to escape, on the obsession with freedom. It trapped its victims not by physical means, but by twisting their thoughts, their sense of self. It fed on doubt, on the belief that one could never escape. But Alaric had learned something in his time within the woods. The true path forward wasn't just about physical escape, it was about releasing the fear, letting go of the need to flee. The forest was not a place, it was a state of mind, and only by accepting that he was no longer bound by it, by accepting that he was part of it, yet beyond it, could he break free. He raised his head, his eyes meeting the figure's. "I am not afraid of you anymore," he said, his voice stronger than it had ever been. "I have seen the truth, and I will not let it define me." For the first time, the figure faltered, its form flickering like a shadow in the light. It was as if the very foundation of its being was beginning to unravel. "You cannot escape what you are," it hissed, its voice distorted, the very air around it vibrating with raw power. Alaric took a step forward, his heart steady. "I can. I will." And with that, he stepped past the figure, moving toward the distant village, his mind and heart resolute. The forest had taken so much from him, But it would not take his will. The curse had shaped him, twisted him, but it had not broken him. As he walked toward the light, toward the village that had once been his home, Alaric knew that his journey was far from over. The woods had tried to claim him, to shape him into something he was not. But now, with every step he took, he was reclaiming himself. And as the sun broke through the clouds above, the shadow of the forsaken woods receded, just a little more. The darkened path through the forsaken woods, where no one returns, Part 5. The village loomed ahead, bathed in the soft glow of twilight. It was as Alaric had remembered it, at least, in the broadest sense. The familiar homes with thatched roofs lined the cobbled streets, smoke curling lazily from chimneys. The sound of children's laughter echoed from the distance, and the warmth of the village's hearths seemed to call out to him. But something was off. There was a stillness beneath the bustle of daily life, a quiet edge to the air that Alaric couldn't ignore. The villagers moved about their tasks, but they didn't seem to see him. Their faces were pale, distant, as though their eyes were focused on something far beyond the world around them. They greeted each other with forced smiles, their conversations muted and mechanical, like echoes from another time. Alaric hesitated at the edge of the village square. His heart pounded in his chest. Had the forest truly let him go? Was this the village he had once known? Or had he stepped into another layer of the curse, a reflection of the life he had lost, but now hollow and twisted? He approached the nearest villager, a man in his mid-30s, who was placing a basket of fruit onto the merchant's stall. The man's face was a mask, his eyes devoid of the warmth that had once filled them. When he looked at Alaric, it was as if he saw only a shadow of the person he once knew. "Excuse me," Alaric said, his voice hoarse. "Do you know where my family is? My father, my mother? They used to live here." The man's gaze flickered for a moment, as if the question took longer to process than it should have. Then, slowly, he nodded. "Yes, they're inside. They've always been inside." Alaric frowned. "What do you mean?" The man's smile was too thin, too strained. "They've never left. They've always been inside." His voice trailed off as he turned away, continuing his task without further word. Confusion gripped Alaric. He moved deeper into the village, his steps growing heavier with each passing moment. The houses, though they looked like his memories of home, seemed hollow, empty shells of a life that no longer existed. The windows were dark, the doors closed, as though the entire village was holding its breath, waiting. And then, in the distance, he saw it, his home, the house where he had grown up, its thatched roof, the small garden where his mother had once tended flowers, the stone steps leading up to the front door. But as he approached, the feeling of familiarity twisted into something darker, something he couldn't explain. He reached the front door and paused. His hand hovered over the doorknob, but he couldn't bring himself to turn it. Something held him back, a deep, gnawing feeling that the moment he crossed the threshold, he would no longer be the person he was. The forest's touch would remain with him, no matter how far he had traveled. Alaric turned away from the door and stepped back into the village square, his eyes scanning the crowd. There was no warmth here, no joy. The villagers, though they moved as if alive, were dead in spirit. They were trapped in an endless cycle, just as he had been. The truth hit him with an almost unbearable force. He hadn't truly escaped. The village, the people, the world around him, it was all a reflection of the forest, a distorted copy of what once was. The curse hadn't just trapped him in the woods, it had spread. It had woven itself into the very fabric of his world, pulling everything he had once known into its depths. He heard a voice then, low and filled with an uncanny resonance. "You think you've escaped, but you have only returned to where it all began." Alaric spun around, his heart racing. The figure, the one that had haunted him in the woods, was standing in the center of the square, its cloak billowing in the windless air. Its eyes glowed with an unsettling light, watching him with an eerie intensity. "No," Alaric said, his voice trembling with a mixture of fear and defiance. "I won't fall for this. This is not real. I've seen what you want me to see. I am not one of them." The figure's lips twisted into something resembling a smile. "You are already one of them, Alaric, just as we all are. The woods claim all." It was never about escaping the forest. It was about accepting that you are part of it. Alaric's legs buckled beneath him as the weight of the figure's words crushed him. He felt the ground beneath him shift, as if the earth itself was being pulled away, the village dissolving into mist. The trees, The shadows. The forest, it was all coming back. The cycle was beginning again. And this time, there was no escape. But as the world around him fractured, something deep inside him stirred. A memory. A whisper. The lesson he had learned during his time in the heart of the forest. He had not walked the darkened path to simply accept his fate. He had come to understand that the true power was not in running, not in fleeing from the forest, but in confronting it within himself. The forest had no hold over him unless he allowed it. He had seen the truth of the curse. It wasn't just about the physical woods. It was about the darkness that lurked in the heart of every soul. The fear, the despair, the desire to escape. With a shuddering breath, Alaric stood tall, his heart beating steadily. The figure's form loomed before him, but he no longer felt the same terror he had when he first encountered it. The forest had no dominion over him. Not anymore. "I will not be your prisoner," he said, his voice strong, each word a declaration of his will. "You have no power here." The figure's smile faltered, its face twisting with a strange mixture of fury and disbelief. "You fool, you cannot escape. You will always be part of the woods. The path has claimed you." But Alaric didn't listen. He turned his back on the figure, his footsteps firm and steady as he walked away from the village, away from the forest's grasp. He could feel the weight of the curse lifting from him, the air growing lighter, the darkness that had once threatened to consume him receding. He didn't look back. He had learned the truth. The forest couldn't define him. It couldn't control him. And as the last of the shadows faded from the village, Alaric found himself standing at the edge of a new path, a path that stretched before him, leading into the light. The journey ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in what seemed like forever, he felt free. No longer a prisoner of the woods. No longer a lost soul. Alaric had finally broken the curse. And the world was his to shape. The Darkened Path Through the Forsaken Woods, Where No One Returns, Part 6. The world felt different now, lighter, more real, as though the very air around him had shifted and breathed new life into him. Alaric stood on the edge of the forsaken village, the last remnants of the forest's grip slipping away from his soul. He could still feel its haunting whispers in the back of his mind, like faint echoes, but they were no longer a part of him. He had broken free, for the first time. The ground beneath his feet felt solid, like the world was his again. But as he stood there, the path ahead stretched before him. There was one question that still lingered: where would he go now? The thought of returning to the village, the place he had once called home, seemed hollow. The people there, if they could even be called people, were trapped in the same cursed cycle, locked in their own quiet despair. No, that was not where his journey would end. He had to keep moving forward. He had to find something beyond the shadows, beyond the lies the forest had woven around him. With a deep breath, Alaric set his sights on the horizon. There was no specific destination, only the drive to keep walking. Each step felt like a release, a reclaiming of his own power. It was an unfamiliar feeling, a feeling of hope that had eluded him for so long. The path ahead twisted and turned, as if it, too, were uncertain of where it would lead. But Alaric knew one thing: no matter where it took him, he would never again be bound by the darkness. The world was wide, and it was waiting for him. As he walked, the sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows on the land. The trees that once seemed suffocating now stood in the distance, far from his reach. He no longer felt their ominous pull, no longer felt the need to run from their grasp. They were part of the world, but they no longer controlled him. Hours passed. Or perhaps it was days. Time seemed fluid now, untethered to any one place. He encountered other travelers on the road, those who looked tired and worn, much like he had been before his journey. They, too, had their own burdens, their own stories of loss and survival. Some spoke to him, some merely nodded in passing, but none seemed to carry the weight of the woods in their eyes. Alaric wondered if they had seen what he had seen, or if they, too, would one day be drawn into the forest's embrace. But that was a question for another time. Eventually, the road led him to a small settlement, a quiet, peaceful village at the edge of a river. The air smelled of fresh water and wildflowers, and the people here seemed different. They smiled openly, their eyes not clouded with fear or despair. It was a simple village, unremarkable in many ways, but to Alaric, it felt like something more. He paused at the village's edge, looking at the stone bridge that spanned the river, the gentle flow of water beneath it, and the horizon beyond. The village represented something that he hadn't realized he had been searching for all along: peace. Not just the absence of the woods, but the absence of the darkness within himself. The river reminded him of the journey he had taken. It flowed endlessly, yet it never returned to the same place. It moved forward, just as he had. There was no going back to the past. The path behind him was lost, and that was okay. What mattered was where he chose to go now. He walked into the village, not as a lost soul, not as a prisoner of the curse, but as someone who had found his way through the darkness. The people greeted him with warmth, offering him food, water, and a place to rest. They had no idea what he had been through, nor did he feel the need to tell them. The past was behind him. The forest was behind him. Alaric sat by the river, his thoughts quiet, as the sun dipped beneath the horizon. The night was calm, the stars sparkling overhead like tiny pinpricks of light in the vast darkness. He thought about the forest one last time, not with fear or anger, but with a quiet understanding. It had shaped him, yes, but it had not broken him. He had broken free. And now, the future lay before him, untold, uncertain, but full of possibility. The laughter of the villagers carried on the night air, and Alaric smiled, feeling a peace that had eluded him for so long. He was free, truly free. And as the river flowed gently before him, Alaric knew that the path ahead, whatever it may bring, would be his to walk. He was no longer the lost soul of the forsaken woods. He was something new, something whole. And for the first time in his life, he was at peace. The end.